There comes a moment in the evolution of the soul when something irreversible begins. It is not loud, it is not dramatic, it does not announce itself with thunder or visions in the sky. It begins quietly, like a subtle crack in the shell of identity you have carried your entire life. And once this crack appears, there is no returning to who you once believed yourself to be. Spiritual awakening is not an improvement of the ego. It is not becoming a better version of your old self. It is the slow and undeniable realization that the self you defended, decorated, compared, and feared for was never your true essence. When this understanding dawns, even faintly, your perception shifts permanently. You may still go to work, you may still speak with friends, you may still participate in the ordinary rhythms of life, but inwardly, something fundamental has changed. The world no longer feels solid in the same way. The ambitions that once consumed you begin to lose their urgency. The fears that once defined you begin to loosen their grip. It is not that life disappears, it is that your attachment to it begins to dissolve. At first, this can feel disorienting. You may wonder why the things that once excited you now feel empty, why conversations that once entertained you now feel superficial, why competition feels exhausting, why noise feels overwhelming. This is not depression, it is not withdrawal, it is sensitivity returning to its natural state. When the soul awakens, it becomes aware of its exile. For lifetimes, consciousness identified with roles, names, achievements, and wounds. Awakening is the remembrance that you are not confined to any of these, and remembrance cannot be undone. There is no going back because awareness cannot become unaware. Once you see the illusion of total identification with the body and personality, you cannot fully believe in it again. You may still participate in the play of life, but you know it is a play, and this knowing changes everything. You begin to notice your thoughts rather than being possessed by them. Emotions arise, but they do not define you. Pain may visit, but it no longer convinces you that it is your identity. A subtle space appears between experience and the experiencer. In that space, freedom is born. Relationships also transform. You can no longer connect through unconscious dependency in the same way. You crave authenticity, depth, truth. Pretending becomes exhausting. Wearing masks becomes intolerable. You may lose certain connections not because you reject others, but because your vibration no longer resonates with illusion. This is why awakening feels irreversible. It alters your energetic structure. You begin to sense when something is aligned and when it is not. Your body reacts differently. Your intuition becomes louder than social conditioning. And once intuition becomes your compass, conformity loses its authority. You may try for a time to return to your old patterns, to re-enter distractions, to revive former desires, but they will taste different. Something within you will whisper, "This no longer belongs to who you are becoming." That whisper grows stronger each time you ignore it. Awakening is not always blissful. Sometimes it feels like loss, the loss of illusions, the loss of certainty, the loss of the comfortable story you once told yourself about who you were. But what you lose is false. What you gain is eternal. And once the eternal has been touched, even slightly, the temporary can never again fully satisfy you. When awakening deepens, you begin to experience a quiet detachment from the drama of the world. Not indifference, but clarity. You see how people argue over shadows, defend identities that are fragile constructions, chase approval that dissolves as quickly as it is given. And instead of feeling superior, you feel compassion. For you remember that you too once lived entirely within that fog. There is no returning because perception itself has shifted. You no longer see events as isolated incidents. You see patterns of karma unfolding. You see how fear drives aggression, how insecurity disguises itself as pride, how longing disguises itself as anger. The surface behavior of others no longer deceives you. You see the wound beneath the weapon. This clarity can be lonely at first. You may feel as though you are walking through a familiar city that suddenly speaks a foreign language. Conversations revolve around status, possession, comparison, but your heart seeks meaning, truth, essence. The noise feels louder because your inner world has become quieter. Awakening also changes how you experience time. Before, you were rushing toward success, toward validation, toward some imagined future where fulfillment awaited you. Now you begin to sense the sacredness of the present moment. The future loses its hypnotic power. The past loosens its chains. There is a subtle contentment in simply being, but this shift requires courage. For once you awaken, you begin to see where you have been living inauthentically. You notice where you have agreed to things that diminished your spirit. You notice where you have silenced your truth to maintain harmony. These realizations can be uncomfortable, yet they are liberating. You cannot unknow your own dishonesty once you see it. You cannot unfeel misalignment once your soul has tasted integrity, and so change becomes inevitable. You begin adjusting your life, not dramatically but deliberately. You speak more honestly. You withdraw from environments that drain you. You simplify. Spiritual awakening also transforms your relationship with suffering. Before, pain felt like punishment. Now you begin to perceive it as purification. Challenges no longer seem random. They become initiations. Every loss strips away attachment. Every disappointment dissolves illusion. Every heartbreak expands compassion. There is no going back because you now understand that nothing external can complete you. The search that once drove you outward turns inward. Meditation becomes nourishment. Silence becomes a teacher. Solitude becomes sacred rather than frightening. You may still experience desire, ambition, and emotion, but they no longer rule you. They pass through you like weather across the sky, and you begin to identify not with the weather, but with the sky itself. This is the irreversible shift. You no longer believe you are the storm. You are the awareness in which the storm appears, and once you recognize yourself as awareness, the old identity feels like clothing that no longer fits. You may try to wear it again for familiarity, but it constricts you. The soul has expanded. The container has broken. As this awakening matures, you begin to feel a profound internal reordering. Values that once guided you quietly dissolve, and new ones arise without effort. Success is no longer measured by accumulation, but by alignment. You do not ask, "How much can I gain?" but rather, "How deeply am I living in truth?" There is a refinement of perception that takes place. You become sensitive to subtle compromises. Even small acts of self-betrayal echo loudly within you. A lie that once seemed harmless now feels heavy. A decision rooted in fear now feels unbearable. It is not that you have become rigid. You have become attuned. This attunement changes your energy. People may notice you are quieter, yet more present. You speak less, but when you speak, it carries weight. You no longer feel the need to convince others of your perspective. Truth does not argue, it simply stands. You also begin to recognize how often the mind seeks distraction to avoid stillness. Before awakening, silence may have felt uncomfortable. Now you see that discomfort was the ego fearing its own dissolution. In silence, you encounter yourself without narrative, without performance, without identity. And though this can feel vast and unfamiliar, it is also deeply peaceful. There is no going back because you have tasted this peace. Even if you temporarily fall into old habits, something within you remembers. A subtle longing pulls you inward again. The outer world may tempt you with stimulation, but it no longer satisfies in the same way. The soul has shifted its appetite. Awakening also changes how you experience love. Attachment begins to transform into presence. You no longer cling as tightly because you no longer fear emptiness. Love becomes less about possession and more about freedom. You allow others to evolve without trying to shape them into your comfort. This can create distance between you and those who still operate from unconscious patterns, not because you judge them, but because your nervous system no longer resonates with chaos. You begin choosing peace over intensity, depth over drama, authenticity over approval. There is grief in this transformation, not grief for what is real, but for what you once believed was real. You may mourn old dreams, old identities, old versions of yourself. But this mourning is sacred. It is the shedding of skin that has grown too tight. You start to see life as a process of unveiling rather than achieving. Nothing new is added, illusions are removed. What remains is simpler, clearer, lighter, and perhaps the most irreversible change is this: you no longer fear being alone. Solitude becomes nourishment. You discover that your own consciousness is vast company. In this discovery, dependence dissolves. You may walk through the same streets, speak the same language, fulfill the same responsibilities, but inwardly, you are living from an entirely different dimension of awareness. And once awareness expands beyond the ego, it can never shrink back into ignorance. And now you begin to understand the deepest truth of this transformation. Awakening is not something that happens to you. It is what you have always been, finally recognized. The reason there is no going back is not because something was added to you, but because something false was removed. Illusion once acted as a veil, and you mistook the veil for your face. When the veil falls, even briefly, you cannot fully mistake it again for your identity. You may still experience moments of forgetfulness. You may still feel anger, desire, fear, or doubt. Awakening does not make you superhuman, it makes you conscious. The difference is immense. Before, emotions controlled your direction. Now you witness them without surrendering your center. There is a quiet strength that emerges from this recognition. It is not loud confidence. It is not spiritual pride. It is stability. You are no longer shaken so easily by praise or criticism. The world may applaud you and you remain steady. The world may reject you and you remain steady. For your anchor is no longer external. You also cease trying to explain yourself to those who cannot yet see what you see, not from arrogance, but from wisdom. You understand that consciousness unfolds in its own timing. Just as a flower cannot be forced to bloom by pulling its petals, awareness cannot be rushed by argument. Compassion deepens in you. You begin to see humanity as souls in various stages of remembrance. Some still sleep deeply in material identification. Some are stirring. Some are resisting the call to awaken, and some are quietly stepping into light. You judge less because you understand more. The most irreversible change is this: you no longer seek completion outside yourself. The restless search that once defined your life begins to fade. You are not searching for identity because you have glimpsed your essence. You are not chasing validation because you have touched inner sufficiency. You are not terrified of endings because you sense that consciousness is eternal. Death itself begins to lose its sharp edge of fear, not because you desire it, but because you understand that what you truly are cannot perish. The body is a garment, the personality is a role, awareness is the actor behind them both. Once this realization stabilizes, life becomes simpler. You act, but without desperation. You love, but without possession. You work, but without losing yourself in the work. You participate fully, yet remain inwardly free. This is why there is no going back. You cannot return to unconscious identification once you have glimpsed your infinity. You cannot fully believe you are small once you have felt the vastness within you. You cannot imprison yourself again inside narratives that you now see as temporary constructs. Awakening does not remove you from the world. It removes the world's power to define you, and when that shift becomes permanent, you walk through life with quiet certainty, not because you control it, but because you no longer need to. You have remembered who you are, and remembrance, once awakened, is eternal.